there is a tremendous value in gay people showing up and protesting outside the Supreme Court on December 4th. This is an issue, and this is very rare for me to talk this way, but I think this is an issue, this is a case where the Supreme Court does not know the whole story. Normally, they do know the whole story because in our adversarial system, there's an incentive for each side to put forward their best case. And so between the two sides, you get the whole story. But as I explained earlier, the gay story has just not made it into the case file here. I mean, there are certainly some amicus briefs that reference it, but there are, I believe, like over 75 amicus briefs, and the court is not required to read them. So on top of that, you have a media that has never adequately reported on us, not at all. I mean, there's almost a blackout in the liberal media, which is kind of the mainstream corporate media. They do not talk about people like us who are gays, who oppose this treatment because we think it is hurting young gays and actually adult gays as well.
Hello, everyone. We are here with Glenna Goldis, aka the Unyielding Bicyclist. We have interviewed her before about her Bad Facts Substack, which chronicles the history of gender ideology and the trans rights movement. She is back with us today to use her legal expertise to explain the Skrmetti hearings, which will be held at the U.S. Supreme Court on December 4th. As I'm sure Glenna will explain in greater detail, the Skrmetti case revolves around the constitutionality of state bans on pediatric gender transition. In this interview, we'll talk about the U.S. versus Skrmetti, as well as the protests that many organizations, including our own, are planning on participating in front of the Supreme Court on December 4th. So we'll hand it off to you, Glenna. Tell us, what exactly is this case, the United States versus Skrmetti, and how did we get here?
This lawsuit is part of a rash of lawsuits all over the country, which were filed by the ACLU and other social justice organizations, this particular one by the ACLU. They were all filed in reaction to certain states, now it's about half the country, passing laws that limit or ban pediatric gender medicine, so that kids who say they're transgender cannot be given puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones or surgeries in those states. So Tennessee is one of those states that banned the practice. They did that in 2023, and then the ACLU filed a lawsuit. They were representing a whole bunch of people, 3 kids who identify as transgender, those kids' mothers, and also a gynecologist who likes to administer these treatments. And then as soon as that lawsuit got filed, the United States government under the Biden administration filed a motion to intervene, taking the same side as the ACLU against Tennessee. And so then the United States government became a party as well. Now, the United States government, for technical reasons right now, is actually considered the lead petitioner in bringing this up to the Supreme Court. But the ACLU is also still in the mix. And so both the US government and the ACLU will be making arguments on December 4th.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, Skrmetti, that refers to the Attorney General of the state of Tennessee?
Yes.
So I'm just curious, is there a particular reason why Tennessee ended up being the state that was in this lawsuit versus some of the other states that also have banned pediatric transition?
That's a really good question because, like I said, lawsuits have been proceeding in, I think, over a dozen states now with similar legal issues, especially the main issues, and with similar groups of people in each state bringing the lawsuits. Some of them are further along. For example, the Arkansas lawsuit and Florida, both of those already had trials. So you might expect that they might be the first to make it to the Supreme Court. But for some reason, we're seeing this Tennessee lawsuit go to the Supreme Court first. And this is a case that is it's only made it's through its initial stages, which is Tennessee moving to dismiss the action. And so not a lot has happened in this case in terms of there's been no testimony from experts. There have been no depositions of any of the witnesses. All the court is going off of is these motions that were drafted by lawyers talking about what the legal theory will be and kind of promising what the facts are, but not being able to prove the facts yet. So, in some ways, this looks like a premature action if you're just thinking how could the United States Supreme Court get the best possible view on this issue, which is affecting the whole country. But here we are. And so there's kind of speculation about why this case wound up there first. So Alabama is one of those states that's also seeing litigation on this front, and that's a very hard fought contest there with the Attorney General's office for Alabama has done great work in pulling out interesting documents in discovery and finding out all these things about WPATH and getting WPATH's internal emails out. So that is like maybe the most brutal fight in the country. And they insinuate in the brief that they filed as a third party with the Supreme Court that the US government is kind of playing games and that they kind of maybe tried to petition the Supreme Court in the Tennessee case because they knew that some bad stuff for their side was coming down the pike in Alabama. And once things were in front of the Supreme Court, that's kind of the excuse that other judges everywhere are using to say, like, well, let's just hold off on making a decision. Let's just freeze things until we hear what the Supreme Court thinks about all this. And so, you know, there may have been an element of strategy there, but that's important to note that, like, we don't know. That's just speculation.
Bottom line, though, whatever the decision is in the Supreme Court is going to impact all of these other court cases. And so if the Supreme Court finds that children who identify as trans do have the right to pursue gender medicine as minors, then essentially every state will be required to facilitate gender transition in minors.
Well, the decision out of this case won't be so definitive. Instead, it will say, like, here's the formula that judges should apply when they're evaluating laws like this. And it won't give them the final answer. It won't say, and then the answer will always be, yes, they can get the treatments. But they can establish a formula that is kind of difficult for one side or the other to you know, win under. So we'll have, like, it'll be like the writing's on the wall, possibly, after this decision.
What do you feel are the potential outcomes or the most likely outcomes for this particular case? It sounds like the odds are pretty in the favor of not pro gender medicine for children, but maybe I'm too optimistic about that.
So you're right. That's how we are feeling pretty good. There are two legal theories basically that are being advanced here by the ACLU and the Biden administration. And both these theories are asking for the court to expand rights, essentially. So one of those options is to have transgender people, that's, you know, their language, declared to be kind of a special group, like a suspect class, it's called, similar to the way women are a suspect class, where any kind of law affecting them has to be held up to something called intermediate scrutiny, which means that the state really has to justify what it's doing because this is a special protected class. So that's one thing that the plaintiffs are seeking. Generally, it's believed that it's unlikely the Supreme Court will go for that. It would be a big expansion based on, like, compared to how the Supreme Court has enforced the law before. Like, they're very reluctant to add new categories of people who are a protected class. And then in particular, because it's the conservative Supreme Court, you can just assume that it's, you know, they just don't like to expand that body of law. That being said, some federal circuits have expanded the law in that way. So the Fourth Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, so I'm talking about like the Southeastern United States and the West Coast. So, you know, it's not a completely, I mean, I think it's a bonkers idea, but a lot of federal court judges don't think it's a bonkers idea. So we can't say it's completely ruled out. And then the other legal theory that the plaintiffs are pursuing is saying that having this law is sex discrimination. And this is like, it involves a lot of wordplay, and I don't even know like how much time, but the idea is like, hey, this law has to do with sex. It's saying that girls are not allowed to get mastectomies just because they're girls. And it's saying that, you know, boys are not allowed to get breast augmentation because they're boys. And so that's like sexist because they're letting, you know, if boys have gynecomastia, so they grow breasts, the law allows them to get surgery, but it doesn't allow the girls to get a mastectomy. So the plaintiffs are arguing, well, that is a form of sex discrimination because you're saying that, you know, you're basing the treatment on the sex of the people. And of course, the response to that is that it's completely different purposes that these surgeries are being prescribed. And one of those purposes is like quackery, which is gender medicine. But the state has to be a little more polite than I just was, because again, this is a case where the record is not developed. They haven't, like, you know, really shown the world using the litigation process just how quacky this treatment is. But the idea is like, so they'll be arguing, you know, Tennessee has a right to limit which treatments are prescribed, and that they have like, and they're kind of forecasting, hey, we're going to be able to show that this is not, that they don't have like, that they do have a basis for banning these.
So the path to prohibiting gender medicine for minors is maybe not quite as clear cut as you and I see it, because it's not established yet that gender medicine is, as you said, quack, or, based on such poor evidence that you can not even call it evidence-based medicine. Because that hasn't been established, especially legally. What would be the argument then for prohibiting this sort of procedures being done on kids?
Well, the state has a lot of leeway to prohibit things in general. So they, we just allow states to make a lot of regulations. It's kind of popular for people on the ACLU side to be like, the state has no business in healthcare, and that's just nonsense. The state licenses doctors, for example. And so, traditionally a lot of involvement there, and not necessarily much stopping them. The ACLU talks a lot about like the right to healthcare, but its lawsuits are not about the right to healthcare. They're about the right not to be discriminated against. And so they're kind of making a bunch of steps there to say that it's discriminatory to ban a certain kind of healthcare. So what the state will be arguing is, look, we have a rational basis for banning this, and that's all we need is a rational basis. Now, remember I was talking about trans people being treated as a suspect class, or this whole issue being treated as sexism. So both of those, if those arguments were accepted, they would mean that the state would not just have to show they had a rational basis, they would have to show they had like, an important interest, and that there's like a closer relationship between what they're trying to do and how they're doing it. The bar for the state gets higher if the Supreme Court buys the idea that this is a special class of people or that sexism is at play. But even then, the state would still have, in my opinion, a strong argument to say like, yeah, we have a really good argument for banning these.
Curious if you know of any precedent, like any cases in the past that involve something similar, like where a state banned a particular medical procedure and there was a whole lawsuit about it. Because the only thing I can think of that was sort of maybe comparable had to do with some of the litigation about medical marijuana. And the Supreme Court actually gave quite a bit of leeway to not just the state government, but the federal government to restrict medical marijuana. So I don't know if you know of any comparable cases.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the comparable cases where they're trying to, there's assisted suicide where the states were trying to create that regime and legalize, and the US Supreme Court ultimately found that there's not a right to that sort of so-called healthcare. And so that's just one example of there not being a right to healthcare in the state, and the federal government being able to regulate that.
Going back to the protected class, or what do you call it?
Yeah, they're suspect class, maybe.
Suspect class.
Yeah.
Suspect class, protected class, and classifying trans people or people who identify themselves as trans. I'm curious, what about gay people or homosexual, same-sex attracted people? Because we know from our org, through the dysphoria support group that we had, and just our discussion groups, that many same-sex attracted adults talk about how when they were kids, they wished they were the opposite sex, or felt very uncomfortable in their bodies through puberty and even somewhat in adulthood. It's a very common experience for homosexuals or same-sex attracted people to experience this gender dysphoria. So couldn't it be argued that by blocking this medical transition of minors, you're protecting gay people from bodily harm that is unnecessary, because 80% or something of kids and teens that experience gender dysphoria outgrow it by adulthood, one study found. So yeah, what about the gay people, I guess, is my question. And is that an argument that Tennessee or Skrmetti will make? Probably not, but can we hope?
Well, at this stage, I don't think that's not going to be coming into play. We know what their arguments are, and that's not in there. I wish it were, and it's something that has been sorely missing from all these conservative states' arguments, as far as I've been able to view them, where it's just not coming into play, and there are different reasons for that. So, well, first of all, we can say that intuitively, we all know that pediatric gender medicine is discriminatory against gay people. And so there's definitely some feeling that that there should be a lawsuit there. And in fact, there are a few lawsuits that have been filed by Shapeshifter and by another person. I don't know how public he is. The lawyer is Mitra Faruhar, and she's making the argument that the treatment they received was so bad and it was actually discriminatory against them as gay people because of the way their internalized homophobia was not addressed. So that legal theory is out there. I hope it will be successful. There are some reasons beyond everybody's control that there may be obstacles to it, but intuitively and I think morally, that is like the correct view to take. And so then there's the question of what is going on with these pediatric gender medicine lawsuits. And I think the way it could factor in, but it doesn't, but it could factor into these states' defenses of themselves. They could be saying that we have a rational basis for banning this treatment, and it's because we're looking out for gay kids. They're not making that argument. And I should say in defense of the lawyers, one reason they're not making that argument, I think, is because the legislatures themselves did not ban it for that reason, unfortunately. Like at least the parts of the record that I'm familiar with. And, they have some good reasons. Like these are definitely a lot of good minds at work, but I haven't seen any quotes from legislators saying like, I'm concerned about gay kids. And there may be some. I definitely have not reviewed every possible, but what has come up is there's the medical reasons, obviously, and then there are also some legislators are making kind of religious statements for those individuals that may have been motivating, and that's all fine. But in any case, it means that as far as I know, there's not a record for the lawyers to then draw on later to be like, hey, we banned it to help gay people. But I think it would be really helpful if they worked that narrative into their case, because there have only been 3 trials so far. Ohio, Arkansas, Florida. Ohio's our side won, great. Arkansas and Florida, our side lost. And the judges' opinions were really, I mean, these were Democratic appointees, and they made no secret of the fact that they thought that our side was bigoted against so-called transgender people. These were just normie liberals who probably watch MSNBC every night. And I think they would have been kind of bowled over if they found out how homophobic we believe they are, because they seem like guys who don't want to be seen as homophobic and harming gay kids. But functionally, that's what's going on, is they're hurting gay kids because they refuse to listen to the defense's experts, and in fact seem to, well, in one case kind of said that all the defense's experts were religious, which was not even accurate and had not come up at trial. And in the other case in Florida, he just said like, oh, well, they weren't scientific. I was like, what? How are they not scientific? They seem scientific to me. So yes, gay people should be factors in these lawsuits, but as far as I'm aware, they have not been. And certainly in Tennessee, that has not been brought up by the lawyers. I don't know if there might have been in passing, but maybe not even in passing.
Interesting. So I'm curious if the Supreme Court rules in favor of Skrmetti and says it grants states a fairly wide leeway to ban these procedures, although, as you said, it can't really give a totally definitive, precise ruling. What do you think groups like the ACLU are going to do next? Are they going to continue to pursue legal lawsuit-related avenues, or what do you think they could do?
I think they will keep litigating. I think even if it looks bad for them, they'll keep on fighting these cases. They receive a lot of donations on this topic. So, and their job is to litigate. So what are they going to do? They're going to keep litigating for the thing they were paid to litigate, I guess. I've heard like kind of through gossip that their 2 big moneymakers are abortion and quote transgender justice.
I don't know if you know any more about some of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit who, I guess you were saying, were they parents of kids who were trying to undergo some sort of hormonal or surgical interventions? Do we know more about them and about like why those particular people were chosen to be plaintiffs?
Yeah, so like I said, this is kind of a formula that the plaintiffs, like these law firms like the ACLU, they apply it in every single state. They like to have a combination of kids, their parents, and a doctor as the plaintiffs. And then they're kind of telling the story of all these people through their lawsuit. So the kids are involved, and the idea is there are 3 here in Tennessee. They are the people who supposedly have a right to equal protection, meaning like not to be discriminated against. Their parents are pulled in, and I think the real reason the ACLU likes to have like the parents, the doctor, and all that is just like for the overall narrative and how it looks. But I think they also like this legal argument that they're making on behalf of the parents, which is parental rights. Now, this question is not before the Supreme Court. The court didn't pick that one up. And I think I understand why. I think it's kind of a sideshow. Like, I don't think that it would make sense I think it's going to be decided on the issue of whether the kids have this right, because it wouldn't make sense to say the kids have no right to get this drug, but the parent has a right to inject them with the drugs just because they're parents. Like, that would be weird. So I can see how the parental rights thing is might be viewed as not central to the case. But I think that the ACLU really likes having the parents involved because parental rights is very popular. But, it's bipartisan. Like, who doesn't like parental rights? You have to be like, that's pretty fringe not to support parental rights. And every parent in America supports parental rights, and that is a lot of people. So I think it has this political appeal. And also because we've all heard the accurate stories from parents who've been like cut out of their kids' lives, they've been mistreated by teachers and doctors and everybody else, and their voices are rising and they're very powerful because, again, like they're telling the truth and what's happened to them is awful. So I think the ACLU is trying to get ahead of that by saying, like, look at these wonderful parents we have. In the trial transcripts I read from Arkansas, they were really drawing out the fact that the parents were treated so well through this entire thing and that the doctors really got their consent for everything. And it's like, yeah, but what if they'd said no? The ACLU is not putting those guys on the stand. So I think that's how the parents come in from a kind of theatrical point of view and legally.
Yeah, that is something I've noticed in the narrative in defense of allowing pediatric transition, is this narrative of we don't want to interfere with the decisions of the doctors and their parents and their children. Like, it's this group
Yeah.
come up with this good decision, right?
Yeah, this inviolable unit. But it's funny because sometimes they really emphasize the role of the doctor, and sometimes they just throw the doctor out the window and pretend the doctor doesn't exist. Like they act like, the parental decision is sacrosanct and they have to make this on their own. And it's like, what? Parents don't make medical decisions on their own. They ask the doctor what the doctor thinks. And so they try to compare it to situations, again, because there's legal precedent in other areas for extending parental rights. So they try to compare it to like much simpler situations or situations where there's simply no other party involved. But it's like, no, here there's a doctor, and parents are not, we shouldn't grant parents the right to do things that are medically terrible for their kids.
So I hate to sort of put you on the spot about making predictions, but I'm just curious in terms of the makeup of the Supreme Court, even though it does have a conservative majority and, a Democrat minority, that's sort of a simplification of all the different eccentricities of each justice. Like, for example, Neil Gorsuch kind of has a reputation, some people call him as more libertarian, and some people speculated that maybe he actually is not going to rule with a conservative majority in this case. Do you have any premonitions, any thoughts about how particular justices might rule for or against this?
Yeah. And I don't know what individual justices, but they fall into different categories for me. So we have there's 9 total, 3 of them are liberals. And as far as we've been able to tell, like, the liberals are just total normies. Like, Justice Jackson at her confirmation hearing said that she couldn't tell the Congress what a woman was because she's not a biologist. So like, that's what we're dealing with from those 3. I would love to see them break. And also Justice Sotomayor, a year ago, wrote dissent related to, it was an LGBT case about, whether bakers should be required to bake cakes for gay people who come in if they don't like gay marriage. And Sotomayor's opinion, what's interesting about her opinion is, like, it's very emotional, and also it just gets into all these online debates. Like, you can tell that her clerks drafted it and she had no idea what was going on, because it refers to like the Pulse nightclub shooting. That is a great example of like homophobia. And Matthew Shepard, that's homophobia. And those are 2 things that are actually, like, after the fact, they were determined, the facts came out that they're just horrible events, but weren't caused by homophobia. And everybody who's very online is super into like arguing one side of that or the other. And so the fact that they made it into Sotomayor's opinion and the factual record, or the historical record, I think it suggests to me, I don't think she herself like follows that and would really pick those examples out of the air. I think she can't think of one single example of homophobia in her entire life. And so that's why she has to rely on these fake ones that her clerks snuck in, because I think her clerks are probably these very online dorks who are like, haha, I'm winning the internet debate now because I'm a clerk for the Supreme Court and I'm able to sneak in these like things that are false but support our narrative. So all that is to say, I would love for the liberals to wake up and kind of read the amicus briefs and become alert to what's going on, but I'm not betting on it. So that leaves us with the 6 conservatives, which is so exciting for me as a liberal to be analyzing the conservatives and seeing like, oh, how much in my favor will they be? So Neil Gorsuch, as you stated, is kind of known as a libertarian, and he's famous in the LGBT world because he was the one who drafted Bostock, which banned discrimination against, quote, transgender people and gay people in the employment context. It did it in a very messy way. For some reason, he never used the term gender identity, even though that was like the hotly disputed thing and always is. So he kind of avoids that. He avoided a lot of issues and is kind of a clunky opinion as a result. But we all see him as being like, okay, I guess he's sort of into trans rights then because he drafted that opinion. John Roberts, the Chief Justice, signed on to that opinion in Bostock. So he apparently has some kind of sympathy in that direction. But it's interesting because he's also known as one of the more conservative justices socially. Like I think he was, opposed to gay marriage. He wrote one of the dissents in 2015 for gay marriage. So it's kind of interesting that he is in this category, and they are two different issues, and time has passed, so who really knows? And
well, and it could be argued that, being anti-gay does not mean you will be anti-trans, and being pro-trans definitely does not mean you will be pro-gay.
Definitely. Although Bostock covered gay and trans, which is another frustrating thing, is that they just refer to gay and transgender people as though they're totally parallel categories, where there's no separate analysis for either one. So it's funny, even though I think that Bostock and Obergefell are two totally different issues, like I'm surprised that Justice Roberts saw them differently, I guess, because I would expect him to be too primitive. But I should stop saying these things about the most important members of my profession. But so we have those two, and then we're up to 5, so there's 4 more. As you can see, we're in this awkward space where we're kind of like, we want these justices to be on our side, but we know that they're kind of not very, they might not totally agree with us on gay issues. That being said, I think that they are mostly not anti-gay these days, like conservatives, especially, and this is maybe just like total fantasizing or whatever, but we have people who are like, they're kind of Gen X at this point, like people like Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett, and I imagine they've had gay friends. Generally, the conservatives I've met lately, like they don't seem to have a problem with gay people. So I don't think we're dealing, I don't think anybody on this court will want to like consciously want to transition gay kids. I think like if they knew what was going on, they would probably be disturbed, but I don't think they're like, I don't know that they are clued in enough to realize that is an aspect here, because the media has not informed them, and it didn't come up in the principal briefs in this case. So these are all these ideas like floating around my head where I'm like, there's potential to get these conservatives on our side for the right reasons. There's potential to get them on our side for the wrong reasons. Like there's so many ways this could play. And by the way, there are also a few justices who are like definitely going to rule on the side of Tennessee. So that would be Alito and Thomas. So they're very conservative, and they seem to be tuned into the culture wars, and you can kind of tell from their past writings on this issue. Like I think that, and again, I don't know exactly what they're picking up from the culture wars, but I think they're probably following some predictable sources that are saying like this trans stuff has gone too far.
Do you think it's any way possible that the Supreme Court's going to somehow punt on this issue and send it back to the lower courts, or is that just would be too kind of cheaty sound at this point?
So we talked about that at the Diag space, and I was saying like that's a possibility here. It happens occasionally, and I just feel like if it's ever going to happen like once a year or less, like this is a case where it would, because it's also messed up. But Justice Cipher was there, so she's retired from the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, so she really has the insight into like the judicial mind, and she was skeptical of that. She thinks that they're, with all the attention that's been on it, that they are going to make a ruling, whether they're comfortable doing so or not. That being said, I am still anticipating an ambiguous outcome, in the sense that, they may clearly state, look, transgender people are not a suspect class. So like that aspect of it could be clear. But in reaching that analysis, they might do something like define what a transgender person is in the way that the ACLU likes. And that you give those people an inch, and they will be quoting that forevermore. Like, here's what a transgender person is. Right now, they just use mumbo jumbo. Like they say, oh, it's the gender identity that's incongruent with your sex assigned at birth. Again, their language. If they are able to add a citation to a Supreme Court opinion, they will love doing that. It will actually add some weight to their position, even though it shouldn't. Even though this should be a question of like, just like that doesn't make any sense. Just the fact of like, if they can add the weight of the Supreme Court to that dumb little quotation, it will help. They will run with that. They will maybe fundraise off of it. It will be just that much harder for us to excise from the law once we kind of reveal this to be a scam in a few years.
So for example, if they find, let's say, that a trans person is anyone who purports to experience gender dysphoria is trans, if that's the definition now, then it could be, okay, so that made the umbrella so much bigger, and that opens the floodgates to perhaps like self-ID laws, to say, well, this is, a way to help the trans individuals. And it could mean that somebody doesn't even need to pursue medical transition to be classified as trans. If, let's say, hypothetically, they decide that the definition is so broad that it can include more people.
Yeah, all right, so this is so tricky. So right now, there's not a definition at the Supreme Court level. There's some circuit courts and certainly some states that have defined transgender, and they don't even do it the way you just did, because the way you just did sort of made sense, tracking, yeah.
I
So
try
seriously,
to make sense.
so you make a lot more sense than all these federal judges, because the federal judges, they just roll with what the ACLU put to them, and the ACLU does not want it to be the same thing as a medical diagnosis. They're making it this like metaphysical thing where, again, and I apologize if I'm quoting, the gender identity is not congruent with the sex assigned at birth. That is nonsense, but that is the definition that they want in the law, and that's what they've achieved in certain jurisdictions. But thankfully, so far, we have avoided having it put into law at the federal level under the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I was about to say defining transgender according to having gender dysphoria is kind of passé in,
Yeah.
for progressive circles. So I could see the ACLU being a little bit upset about that, though, like you said, they could, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. They could probably find some way to use that to their advantage. Yeah.
So I'm really wanting to hear your thoughts about this whole court case happening December 4th being a really opportunity for gay rights organizations such as LGB Alliance USA to really make a statement. And is there a benefit in gay people or straight allies showing up and making their opinions known on it? Can you talk a little bit about that for me?
Absolutely. There is a tremendous value in gay people showing up and protesting outside the Supreme Court on December 4th. This is an issue, and this is very rare for me to talk this way, but I think this is an issue, this is a case where the Supreme Court does not know the whole story. Normally, they do know the whole story because in our adversarial system, there's an incentive for each side to put forward their best case. And so between the two sides, you get the whole story. But as I explained earlier, the gay story has just not made it into the case file here. I mean, there are certainly some amicus briefs that reference it, but there are, I believe, like over 75 amicus briefs, and the court is not required to read them. So on top of that, you have a media that has never adequately reported on us, not at all. I mean, there's almost a blackout in the liberal media, which is kind of the mainstream corporate media. They do not talk about people like us who are gays, who oppose this treatment because we think it is hurting young gays and actually adult gays as well. So we are totally invisible in this large country that is so dependent on media, which is failing them. This protest at the Supreme Court is going to attract attention. The whole world is going to be there. Not only is this a major case in front of the Supreme Court, but this happens to be a boring year for the Supreme Court. There just aren't that many, quote, like blockbuster cases. So like if you are a journalist with any interest in the Supreme Court at all, then like you're not going to call in sick that day. You're going to rearrange your schedule and go down there. And with the election we just had, everybody's talking about transgender issues. So it's topical. You're going to have anybody who cares about current events, any journalist who cares about the Supreme Court, and anyone who cares about sexism or everybody. Media will be there. And, I have not seen I'm trying to think if I've seen anything in the New York Times that is encouraging. But the fact is they'll be there. And if there are only a few of us, then they can continue to pretend that we don't exist. They can crop us out of the photos. They could just take photos of the Christian conservatives who are, they have a valid point of view and they're my friends, but I don't want them to be the only face of this because that's just not an accurate view. We should be included in the picture as well. So if there are more of us, then they can't crop us out of the pictures. They can't pretend we don't exist. If we go there and we get interviewed by media that is considered right-wing or heterodox, then that puts more pressure on the left-wing media because it's like, hey, how come this story is coming out of that TV over there, but not that one over there? How come that story is coming at me from 4 different angles, but not the New York Times, which has more resources than all these other newspapers? So we can shame them and force them to talk about us if we are there physically in person, talking, waving signs.
Yeah, these left-wing media sites that claim to be pro-gay, if they see actual gay people talking to the conservative side and the conservative side defending gay people and saying we must protect children who will grow up to be gay, that's, I mean, did hell freeze over? What happened? So, and I like what you
Yeah.
said about the importance of having numbers. And, you know, not that there's anything wrong with a Christian conservative cohort being there, you know, but gay people, LGB, same-sex attracted people are a large number of people that are negatively impacted by gender ideology and have something to say. And just because we don't have the same numbers as the Christian conservative doesn't mean that we shouldn't be heard or listened to. And I think that you hit it spot on, that we don't want to get cropped out of the picture anymore, because most of us are left leaning and just feel totally abandoned by the left.
Exactly. And there are reasons why it's harder for us to get our voices out there. Gay people are a minority, obviously. We're just like a couple percentage points of the population. So of course, we just start at a big disadvantage there. And then a lot of us have jobs in the liberal world. And there's been a lot of pressure from on high. Yeah. So there's been a lot of pressure from on high for anyone who works in one of these many fields to stay quiet. And of course, we have gay friends. And so this has been, you know, the trans side of things has been targeting our community for a long time, and they have transitioned, many of us. So a lot of people find themselves in complex social situations, whereas, you know, for the Christian conservatives, they have challenges as well. But if you're in a community where everybody agrees with you, then you don't have as many concerns about being seen at the Supreme Court. So, you know, there's lots of justification for why we have not been able to yell as loudly as we need to yell, but we just have to get out there and do it anyway. It's the only way to move forward.
And this is a fantastic opportunity to make that happen, sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you think, do Supreme Court justices themselves pay attention to the protests?
So they're not going to physically notice us like as they walk into the building that day. They have some special route that like is designed to avoid the protest. But they're people, they watch the news, like, and you know, there's 9 of them. They also have clerks, they have friends, they live in the world. And so I think that the liberals will be reading the New York Times the next day, and the conservatives will be watching Fox News, and maybe, I don't mean to insult them, maybe there's some other source too, the Wall Street Journal. So like if we can get into the Wall Street Journal, then, you know, I think that's what Supreme Court justices read. And so that is how they would learn about us.
That's a great overview of why it's important that people participate in these protests. And I know it's going to be it's very hard to actually hear arguments in the Supreme Court building itself. Only a select number of people can enter who either have special connections or camp out in advance. So we'll have to wait for the actual formal news coverage to get a better sense too of where what questions the justices are asking, and you know where the straws in the wind are pointing. So are there specific things that you're looking out for? Are you, in terms of that, or are you just going to wait and see when it happens?
Yeah, there are a few things I'm interested in hearing. And, you know, there is a live feed that comes out of the Supreme Court. So I don't know if we'll be in a position to play that at the protests. Or I've never been there, but to see if like we're able to listen that way. But if not, I will be listening to it on my way back to New York that afternoon. And I will be curious to hear whether they get into the questions of definitions. There's like the definitions are everything. The ACLU is very careful not to define sex. And in fact, it like kind of lectures the reader, the judge, not to use the term biological sex. They say it is imprecise, and the Endocrine Society warns against it. So don't use the term biological sex. And then they never give an alternate definition of like, what is sex, or what are we talking about? So if they also, needless to say, do not define gender, but they say that it is, they say gender identity is your sense of your gender, for example, male or female. And so everybody who's kind of like casually reading, or any normal person reading that, is like, male or female, okay, they're talking about sex. They're not talking about sex. And I know I sound like a conspiracy theorist until you know this topic, and then I don't. But yeah, they don't define sex, they don't define gender, they don't explain what they mean when they say like, oh, this little child who is a girl wants to be male. Okay, but why does becoming male involve growing a beard? Now, if you have a normal definition of sex, you say, oh, it's because like men have beards because they have testicles that produce testosterone, which makes your beard grow. Like that's like a normal scientific response. But remember, the ACLU will not acknowledge that sex exists. So they can't answer the question of like, why do you need to grow a beard to seem male? Like they cannot answer that because a definition of a male is anybody who says they're a male. So it's like the three of us, men, like they cannot draw any lines around that, which means they can't explain why these kids need the medical treatment that will make them look like, and again, they can't say the word male, just make them look like what they want to look like, which is not particularly tethered to any sort of sex because sex doesn't exist. Like, so if the Supreme Court realizes that and starts asking questions like pinning them down, then we've won. Then this whole thing is over. But I'm not optimistic about that. Like, this is why I want to listen on the live feed, because if in the very unlikely event that happens, like first question to the Solicitor General of the United States, like, what is sex? Boom. Like, then the whole crowd should just explode. It's like the Supreme Court figured it out. but don't get your hopes up. So other than that, I mean, everything is so much less exciting than asking like, what is sex and what is gender and why is a beard male? But if there are hints that they've read the amicus briefs, that is really good because there are fantastic amicus briefs on our side touching on all sorts of issues. So the turfy feminist briefs go into what I just discussed of the definitions and how none of this makes any sense from the ground up. And then you have Alabama, which I discussed before, like they're going through all of that discovery in their case where they've exposed WPATH. And so their brief with the Supreme Court is just an expose of the pseudoscience. If there's any hint that the justices have read that, like they just ask some questions that seems like, oh, they only could have thought of that if they read the brief, that will be good. That would mean they are on the ball. And gays, obviously, that would mean that they've dug into this deep but I don't see that happening. That would be good. And let's see, what would be bad? Like if they fall into suicide trap. So, there's this, and I spared you the story of like how the case got to the Supreme Court. It went through the appeals court, of course. That was one of its stops. And people really like the appeals court decision that was from the Sixth Circuit because it was basically on our side. But when you dive into it, like of course, they don't understand the definitional problem. They also, like, they really wring their hands about the importance of boys receiving this treatment young in order to ward off puberty and be able to pass better later. So they go into that and they're like, we are really sympathetic about that. We are very concerned. It actually says something like the plaintiffs raise a really good point there. And then it just veers away on technical grounds, like, but the state still is entitled to pass this law. So you could tell that they were just like on an emotional level, like, oh man, like we got to help these 12-year-old boys pass later on in life. And they kind of implicitly accepted the idea that the quote unquote gender dysphoria is going to stick around the rest of their lives, because they're not saying, well, hey, the 12-year-old feels this way now, he might not feel that way once puberty progresses. Like, so they really bought into a lot of the foundation of the ACLU's argument. And you can see that crystallized in that one paragraph. Like, our side gets very excited about any decision that's on our side, just in terms of the outcome. But the fact is, a lot of these decisions are not, they're not based. They are kind of fumbling, and they're reaching the right conclusion for reasons that are a little bit off, and they're adopting some of the language of the other side. So to answer the question, if the Supreme Court justices are kind of falling down a lot of rabbit holes about those poor boys who won't be able to pass later on, or, oh my gosh, kids are going to commit suicide, then that means that they have not digested all the briefs on the other side, and that they are anxious about the manipulative, false arguments put forward by the Biden administration and the ACLU.
Okay, so those are things that we can be attuned for as this progresses. So the bottom line is there's a lot of stuff we don't have control over. It's up to the Supreme Court, obviously, but we do have some time to shape the narrative here, which is why there are protests that we're going to be going to, and that we encourage other people to go to, especially if you're already a local and you can get there easily. We want to see crowds. Is there any other thoughts, any other questions you have, Sylvia or Glenna? Any other thoughts you want to say?
I just look forward to seeing as many of our viewers as we possibly can down in DC on December 4th.
I second that wholeheartedly. And I think that we have an amazing opportunity to have some real change in the social narrative. And that I don't want to let this opportunity go to waste.
All right. With that said, Thank you everyone for watching. We also encourage you to watch our previous interview we had with Glenna, who was going by Unyielding Bicyclist, and encourage you also to check out her Substack, her Bad Facts Substack, which is a very helpful Substack. So we'll offer links to that below, and we hope to see you again next time. Bye, everyone.